Welcome to our Watch app programming course from Edgionics. My name is Brett, and in this lecture, we're going to learn about the Watch architecture. We're going to step back and look at what happened in WatchOS 1. So we have the iPhone app, and a Watch app needs to pair with an iPhone app. So you can't have a Watch app by itself. So the Watch app would get deployed. So what you would have is your WatchKit extension get deployed to the Watch app. The WatchKit extension is where your code is, and in the Watch app is where your storyboard is, so your UI and your various resources. The way it worked with iOS 1, the Watch app would have to go back to the iPhone. The host app, you can think of it as, which is the iPhone app, the iOS app, and in there was where your code lived, the WatchKit extension code. So this was your interface controller for WatchKit, and it processed whatever the commands were from the Watch app inside of the WatchKit, which was on the iPhone. And one of the problems with this is latency, of course. So the user is tapping on your Watch app, so your storyboard, your UI elements, and maybe interacting with some of the resources that you might have pushed out to the Watch app. Then that has to go back. The commands from the UI on the Watch app have to go back to the WatchKit extension on the iOS app and interact with the controllers there, and then move that data, the response, the result, back to the Watch app. So these were not native Watch apps. They were kind of split so that you had your UI actually on the watch, but the back end part that does all the processing was on your iOS app. Now, whenever the user goes and gets the iOS app out of the App Store, so your iOS app, they install it, that will then, if there's a Watch app available, install it to the watch if there's also a watch available. Now, that process hasn't changed much. But let's look at some of the differences with WatchOS 2. In WatchOS 2, we have a similar setup. So we have our iPhone app. So the user goes to the App Store, downloads your iPhone app, and installs it. Your WatchKit extension is on the iPhone app. So your Watch app, and inside your Watch app is your WatchKit extension. What happens from there is the iOS app is going to look, is there a Watch app available? And if there is, can I deploy it? And the conditions there are, is there a watch available? Let's say yes, there's a watch available. Is the watch paired? Is it connected? If those conditions are met, then your Watch app is going to be installed to the watch. So now it's on the watch, and your WatchKit extension is there to execute your code. And what happens is that a copy of your app actually stays inside the iOS app just in case it needs to be deployed again. So if you need to do updates to your Watch app at some point, you deploy the iOS app, the user gets a refresh of the iOS app, which has the new Watch app, and then that will trigger an update to the watch. Now in this case, the WatchKit extension is native on the watch. So your Watch app and your WatchKit extension are both on the watch running locally. They don't have to go back to the iOS app. Now in rare cases, they'll go back. Depends on different kinds of communication. So for example, if you're communicating with a cloud service from the iOS app, it's getting periodic data, then that may come into the iOS app. And what can happen is it will send that to the Watch app depending on if the Watch app is connected and how often you want it to send. Sometimes there's restrictions on how often that data can be sent to the Watch app. But overall, the experience now with the Watch apps are much better because they're more responsive now that you've got your app on the watch and you don't have to depend so much on the iOS app. In fact, if the iOS app goes away, so in other words, they're disconnected, the iOS app closes, the Watch app can continue running. It can even go out to the internet and get data, because now NSURL is available to fetch data from the internet on the watch without the iOS app. There are some cases where the Watch app still needs to go back and communicate with the iOS app, because there might be interactivity because of how you set your dependency up between the iOS app and the Watch app. So you still want them to provide kind of this integrated experience. And if the iOS app is not up and running, you can still trigger background processes. So the iOS app runs in the background. In that case, you can still communicate with it. Same thing with the Watch app. If the iOS app is running and the user is using it, it can also have the Watch app do things in the background. Your app do things in the background, and the user doesn't see that. So with WatchOS 2, there's a lot available that you can now do with your Watch app.